Hi and welcome back to my channel. My name is Håkan Bruvel, and in today's video I'm gonna talk about why I think that the foreground objects in our images can cause a problem. So the past 2-3 years I've seen this trend on Instagram that you need to have a big solid foreground object in your images, and I've also seen and heard this from photographers here on YouTube, and it's especially from landscape photographers. So the reason that you need a foreground object is because you need that foreground object to anchor your images, or that's at least what these landscape photographers tell you. Now, I don't know if I'm stupid, but I have never understood what that means, that you need a foreground object to anchor your image. Now, if you know, please comment down below what that means, that you need a foreground object to anchor your image. And unfortunately, I think this has been such a big trend that a lot of people just put random objects in their images when you don't really need them. And I think that is a big shame, because you can ruin a perfectly good image by just placing just a random object in the foreground. Now there are a lot of great images where there are a foreground or a foreground object, so it's not that you shouldn't use foreground objects. You just need to pick the right moment when to use foreground object. In some images you don't need a foreground object. The images will be just fine without it. So imagine this, for example. You have like a big wide open vista in front of you, and you think, oh, will be a great image to photograph. And but because you have heard that you need this foreground object to anchor your image, you start to look around to try and find that foreground object so you can anchor your image, and you find this big rock. And you've seen all these images that have this foreground object just smack in the middle, in the lower third of the image. So you place the rock there and you take this picture of this open vista. Now, does that make your image better, that you have this rock in the middle lower corner or lower third of your image, or would it be better without that rock? I would say that your image probably would be better without the rock. But because you've heard from all different people here on YouTube and seen images on Instagram, then you might think that the image with the rock is better, because now you have anchored your image. Then I have another example. I saw a YouTube video some time ago. I don't remember this guy's name, but he was out walking, and he was on a field where there usually water, but the tide was out, so there was no water, and he found this boat standing on this field. When I saw this, I thought, wow, he's gonna get a great image. Here you have the boat standing on on solid ground instead of water, and yeah, I thought he could take a great picture of that boat. But unfortunately, he started to look for this foreground object, and he found once again this big rock, and he placed that on the lower left side of the image, and the boat was on the middle right side. And sure, that is fine, but the image or the rock was so big in the image, so you didn't know if the rock was the main subject or the boat was the main subject. And I thought to myself, why include that rock? It had nothing to do with the boat, it had nothing to do with the tide being out. He just used that rock to anchor his image, and I thought, you just ruined a perfectly good image by not including the rock. So if you're gonna use foreground objects, you need to really consider, does this add to my image, or does it take away attention from what you're trying to achieve with your image? So I'm just gonna show some images where I think I have used foreground objects in a successful way, and some images where I have used foreground objects in not such a good way. So the first image is this image, and here I think that I've used foreground objects in a really good way, because the foreground object is the surfer, and he adds to this story because he's walking out for his last surf of the day, and that is the story that I want to tell. So he is a central part in this image. Now if we take a look at another image where I've used foreground objects in not such a good way, is this one. And here the foreground object is the tree, but the tree is such a big part of the frame, and that's not what I wanted to tell with this image. I wanted to tell a story about this small tree in this grand archipelago, but here the tree just takes up so much space, and yeah, it's not really what I wanted at all. So I don't think this is a good way that I've used the foreground object. And we can take another image where I haven't used the foreground object in a particularly good way, and it's this image. Once again, the foreground objects are the rocks, but the rocks take up way too much space in the image, because once again, that's not what I wanted to show with the image. I wanted to show this sunrise, I think it was, on this glorious winter day, but instead I've like 2/3 of the image are rocks, and I'm not really caring about the rocks. I care about the sunrise on this winter day, but that kind of gets lost in this image. Let's take a look at another image where I think I've used foreground objects in a good way, and it's this image. And here the foreground object is the rocks, and here I've used the rocks as a leading line into the sun, because here I wanted to show this beautiful sunrise, and I think the rocks really gets your eye to the sun, because you have the rocks going from the bottom right, and then it follows all the way until you reach the left side, and you go over to the islands on the top third line, and then you reach the sun. And I think this is a really good way to use the foreground object. So that's just some images where I think I've successfully used foreground objects, and some images where I haven't used it in a good way. So what's your thoughts on the foreground object, and how do you use it in your images? I try to think about how I use the foreground object. Does it add to my story that I want to tell with my image? Or if it doesn't, then I might want to remove it from the image. But please let me know how you use the foreground object. And as always, please leave a comment down below, and like the video if you have enjoyed this content. And also please subscribe to my channel, because that would mean a lot to me. And then I hope to see you in the next video. Okay, bye.